This seminar is for educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Consult with your medical provider for medical advice or treatment. Although the presenters try to keep the information in this seminar as accurate and timely as possible, the speakers and Mather Hospital assume no duty to ensure the seminar is error-free. The speakers and Mather Hospital are not responsible or liable for any claim, loss, or damage resulting from you viewing this seminar.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our HealthyU Webinar Series. Today's topic is coping with stress and anxiety. At any time during the presentation, please feel free to answer any questions you may have using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as we can within the time allotted once the presentation concludes. Your questions will remain anonymous. Today's presenter is Denise Driscoll. She's a registered nurse, a certified addictions registered nurse, certified psychiatric clinical nurse specialist, and a certified psychiatric nurse practitioner in New York State. She has practiced behavioral health nursing for the past 35 years and was the first psychiatric nurse practitioner to practice independently at Mather Hospital. She has been fortunate to be able to present her work in the form of peer-reviewed publications, as well as podium and poster presentations at local and national conferences. Currently the AVP for Behavioral Health at Mather Hospital, Northwell Health, she's responsible for all the behavioral healthcare delivery for both inpatient and outpatient programs. She was recognized by the American Nurses Association in 2022 as the recipient of the National Advocacy Award in Washington, D.C. for her work in mental health and substance abuse. All right, Denise, I'm gonna pull up your PowerPoint and then I'll hand it
Thank
off
you
to
very
you.
much. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today to talk about stress and coping with that stress and anxiety beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. And we can go to the next slide, Jonathan. So the numbers are in, the statistics have been calculated, and across the United States today, 95% of people experience stress. And the other 5% are lying about it. We can go to the next slide. Everyone experiences stress. Stress is a natural human response. It's inherent. We're born with it. And the World Health Organization says the way in which you react and respond, the way in which you take care of yourself in response to stress will make the difference in your overall well-being. You can go to the next slide. So what is stress? Stress is your body's way of responding to any kind of physical or mental pressure or demand. So this is very different than a stressor. And sometimes these two things get mixed up. A stressor is something that's outside of ourselves. It's the circumstance that causes the internal stress response or the stress within someone's body. It's generally a short-term experience. We can go to the next slide. So bearing in mind that it is any kind of physical or mental demand on oneself, there are many different faces of stress. So there are circumstances in our life that are sometimes unpleasurable that cause stress. And there's some circumstances in our life that actually are pleasurable and they still cause that same stress. And we'll go to the next slide and we'll talk about what's good stress versus bad stress, or eustress versus distress. So eustress is good stress. It's the stress that arises from the demand of pleasurable or fun activities. So for example, a wedding, a promotion, having a baby. If you've ever said to yourself, oh my goodness, I need a vacation from my vacation, you have experienced good stress. Now the difference is distress, and we're going to focus a lot on this today. Distress is bad stress. It's the stress we experience regarding negative demands, which we must adapt. So it's those experiences that we connotate with unpleasurable emotions. So, for examples, running late, financial issues, loss, relationship issues. But the thing I want you to remember about good stress, bad stress, is that the body doesn't discern if it's a happy occasion that's causing the stress or it's a negative situation or circumstance that's causing the stress. We still have that same pressure and demand on the body that we have to be able to take care of. We can go to the next slide. So I always think it's important to talk about the mind body connection. We sometimes think that this is a new wave type of thinking, this mind body connection. Is it real? But it's been talked about for centuries. You see it across religious beliefs, you see it across philosophies. And as an example, Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor in 180 AD in Rome, he said that when we realize that the power is in our mind and not in circumstance, we have strength. So it's been talked about for a long, long time over the ages. So, what is it about? Why have so many people spoken about it? Well, it makes sense that the mind and the body are connected. I had a quote on the door that said, "Take care of your mind because your body is listening." And given that the majority of preventable illnesses are connected to stress, we have to take that extra time to pay attention to our mind. So, how does the body know that it's experiencing stressful situations? So, for example, how does my intestine know that I'm having a bad day at work? How does my heart, the cells of my heart, know that I've had a fight with a loved one? Those cells cannot think for themselves. Those cells cannot communicate, but our mind communicates with them. And so that is why it is incredibly important to pay attention to not only the outside circumstances, but then what it triggers off from inside of us. And we can go to the next slide. So, how does the brain communicate with the cells of the body? Well, it's through the nervous system. We have two major pathways that are responsible for the stress response, and that is the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system and stress response prepares you for a fight or flight. And I'll explain that fight or flight in the next slide. It increases the adrenaline response, and at times it could be motivating because it's preparing you to protect yourself. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, is the relaxation response. It prepares you to calm down, it prepares you to rest and restore. So we can go to the next slide. So, fight or flight. You may have heard this. You may have heard this sometimes on the news, where you have a mother who has superhuman strength to lift a car, off of their child, or any other feats of superhuman strength in the face of danger. That is our body's response to real or perceived physical or mental threats. It's really a mechanism that aids in the person's survival. So it's an automatic physiological reaction to either something that's perceived to be stressful or frightening, and it activates that sympathetic nervous system and gets the body ready and prepares it to fight. So what the sympathetic nervous system does is it does a quick calculation. All right, we need this for the fight. We don't need that for the fight. So for instance, when we're in fight or flight, our digestive system shuts down, but all that adrenaline then goes to the muscles. And you may have experienced this yourself if you've ever been in almost a near car accident and you get that shakiness. That's your body's response to that perceived threat. And your sympathetic nervous system gets going, right? Because we have to prepare ourselves to fight and survive. And it will shut down certain things and it will send that adrenaline to our heightened awareness and to our muscles. We can go to the next slide. So I want you to think of it, a lot of times you may have heard our body is like a machine, right? So I'd like you to liken this to a car engine. What happens to a car engine when you are constantly putting your foot all the way down on the gas pedal and you are revving that engine and running that engine and you are not taking care of that engine and you are not putting oil in that engine? What eventually happens? The engine will seize. Well, it's very similar to what happens in our engine of the body. If we're constantly going, if we're constantly under stress, if we have too much sympathetic response and not enough parasympathetic response, then we're going to burn out. So we can go to the next slide. So this is just a comic strip that I found that I thought was apropos. It's called Stress, and it'll help us with natural selection. So stress is something actually to help us survive, but we know if we don't take a care of ourselves within it, if we don't balance it, if we don't purposefully inject some of that parasympathetic response in every once in a while, we're going to burn out. We can go to the next slide. So, what are the effects of stress that we see? Well, certainly stress affects the mind, body, emotions, and our behavior. So, for our mind, we may see that people are worrying or they have difficulty with decision making. They may be focused on a lot of negativity, have unclear thinking, make very poor decisions, and may have impaired judgment. We may have fatigue. We may have headaches. We may have taut muscles, skin irritations, or this one always amazes me, frequent infections, right? Because our body's in that constant state with sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system says, okay, we don't need to fight infection right now. We have to fight this perceived or real threat. And so that makes us more vulnerable to infections. It may affect our ability to breathe. It may help lead to us losing our confidence, or we might be apprehensive or indifferent. We may feel depressed or see depression and irritability and lack of sleep. And then in behaviors, stress can lead to substance abuse, loss of appetite, becoming accident prone, restless, lonely, and again, not sleeping. We can go to the next slide. So, what are the effects of prolonged stress and traumatic events? So, wear and tear, ongoing, unrelenting stress that builds up over time without any rest or recovery. So, this is sort of that ongoing engine that keeps continuing to run without having periods of restoration. Loss, experiencing of significant loss, particularly of others, or maybe even parts of ourselves. Inner conflict, an experience that challenges our morals or values, engaging in something that's in conflict with our direct moral beliefs. And then traumatic events, a lifetime experience that instills fear or helplessness. And this is what everyone experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's go to the next slide. So when I was first asked to talk about the mental effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, I sat and thought for a moment about all of us as human beings. We are constantly surrounded by risk. So what do I mean by that, right? We get in cars, we get in planes, we go into stores, we touch a million things per day. We're always surrounded by risk. But why do we get up and do it anyway? And I think that's because we have a very fine line of denial that we walk. And I don't mean denial that's found in pathology or illness, but that healthy mechanism that says, okay, you know what? We're not going to pay attention to all of these risks. Otherwise, we would not be able to function. So I thought about that. And then I thought about what if there was a danger that came that stripped that protective mechanism, protect that fine line of denial. And it left us open to feeling fear and anxiety and worry and uncertainty. And it was so pervasive and unknowing and unrelenting what that would feel like and what would we experience. And certainly in the epicenter in New York, we experienced all of that. And we were faced with that. And we were faced with not only that continuous feeling of, are we going to survive? How are we going to survive for ourselves? But we also felt that for our loved ones as well. So we can go to the next slide. So, what was unique about the COVID-19 pandemic that has left us all feeling this way? And I think I realize it myself. I see people around me more irritable. I see people around me short-tempered. I see people around me more anxious or dysphoric or uncaring since the COVID-19 pandemic. But what was unique about that has this lingering so long? Well, it was a pervasive event of uncertain duration that put us all at risk. It was that huge danger that put us under that constant fight or flight. It was ongoing vigilance and persistence in the sense of life threat. It was a greater loss than 9/11 in New York. I thought that 9/11 was probably going to be the biggest event that I saw in my lifetime, and COVID-19 far surpassed that. It disrupted our mourning and grief rituals. It challenged our family routines. Many people had to go to work not knowing what danger awaited them there, away from their families. Many people had to stay home and learn how to work remotely. Some people were not able to work, causing financial issues. Some children couldn't be watched by grandparents, right, for fear of spreading the illness. And so balancing that work from home and school from home. So just those challenges to the daily family routines. And then challenges with connectedness in an era of social distancing. So I think this is very important. When we needed one another the most, we couldn't be with one another. We can go to the next slide. So Patricia Watson is an American psychologist, and she created the stress continuum model. It was originally created for the military to help military personnel with dealing with stress. And Patricia Watson took it and she modified it for healthcare professionals. And I think that this is a really great model. You don't have to be in the military. You don't have to be in healthcare because it utilizes colors that we're familiar with, right? Green is go, right? That's where we're okay. Red is stop. Red is I'm not functioning at all, and I need to reach out for help. And yellow is sort of these transient type stressors that are happening to us every day. And then orange, not quite red. I am not incapacitated, but I'm injured in some way from this wear and tear or from a single event. We can go to the next slide. So yellow stress versus orange stress. Yellow stress are those day-to-day stressors that we experience. Might be a relationship problem, might be a minor illness, might be a conflict with a peer, it might be money problems, loss of possessions, legal problems, moving. Maybe that we were out doing a lot of activities and we're very busy and we haven't had great sleep. It might be a divorce and it might be the holidays, right? I always say stressful the most stressful time of the year, right, is the most wonderful time of the year. It's the most stressful time of the year for a lot of people. Where orange stress is that ongoing wear and tear, it's loss, it's life threat and traumatic experiences, and it's inner conflict. We can go to the next slide. So, what happens when we're in the orange? What is our body's response when we have these very high levels of stress? Well, we have increased cortisol levels. And so, what does that mean in the body? Increased cortisol levels interfere with learning and memory. They lower immune function, as we talked about earlier. It could increase weight gain. It could cause high blood pressure, could increase cholesterol, cause heart disease and stroke, and certainly cause anxiety. Go to the next slide. So I get this question a lot. So, what exactly is the difference between stress and anxiety? Well, we're not talking about just the feeling of anxiety. When I think about anxiety as a behavioral health professional, I think about it in terms of a sustained mental hygiene issue that can be triggered by stress. So, an anxiety disorder can be triggered by prolonged stress, uh, but it is a behavioral health issue. Anxiety does not fade away once the threat is past, and it can cause significant impairment in social, occupational, and areas of living. So I always ask this. If someone says they are depressed or they're anxious, how is it interfering with your ability to function? And that's going to give me a clue on whether we're talking about transient stress or if we're talking about a disorder. You can go to the next slide. So, what are the key differences? Although many symptoms are similar, anxiety is defined by the persistent, excessive worries that don't go away even in the absence of a stressor. Stress is more transient in nature and it ends when the stressful situation ends, or it ends when that wear and tear ends. Anxiety causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other functioning, and anxiety needs treatment with therapy and or medications. We can go to the next slide. So research has shown that there are 5 factors that people have identified as helpful in recovery from adversity and stress: a sense of safety, a sense of calming, a sense of connectedness, a sense of self efficacy, and a sense of hope. So when we're looking towards how do I handle or how do I cope with stress, we're going to focus on these 5 areas coming up. So we can go to the next slide. So I always like to take a moment to talk about resilience. Now, resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. It's neither lucky nor passive, and it takes deliberate effort, and it can be strengthened with practice. So, resiliency is not something that you're born with, right? We heard a lot about this during the COVID-19 pandemic. Resiliency is the practice of preparing your mind for battle so that when stress happens, we're able to bounce back. So it's something that we can learn. We can go to the next slide. So, what are the interpersonal factors of resilience? The interpersonal factors are emotional, cognitive, and coping. And I would love to stand here before you today and tell you that you will never experience strife. You will never experience stress. Here are the 6 ways that you can do that. You will never have any traumatic events in your life, but I can't do that. You know, being human encompasses all of that. But what I can do is to give you sort of the factors and the things that you would need to do to build that resiliency, to prepare your mind for battle for the next time those things happen, that you can bounce back quicker from. So, emotional factors. I think this is probably the most difficult out of the 3 for people to do. It's the expression of difficult feelings. So, depending upon what you grew up in, it may have cultural factors, it may have, to do with your parents or who raised you, whatever you were marinated in, usually leads to how we express emotions. My husband always knows when I speak on these factors of resilience that I'm going to bring him up, that he very admittedly came from a family where they did not express emotion at all. Um, and I came from a family that expressed every emotion about everything, right? Not saying one is better than the other, but I'm saying in order to do it, you may have some difficulties with that depending on how you grew up. But the idea here is that feelings buried alive never die, right? They're there. They're sort of nagging at us all the time, and we're carrying them around with us. And when I've done therapy with patients that have a difficult time expressing their feelings, I have them imagine, and I may be dating myself a little bit, a styrofoam float, right? That you have in a pool, and that represents your feelings. And you take that styrofoam float and you press it down underneath the water, right? A lot of pressure to press it down, and then you stand on it, right? Want to keep it down. And that keeps us stuck. If we step off of it and we express it, then we can let it float around with us and we have freedom, right? It's not as heavy. It doesn't keep us in that one spot. So to think about that. Ways of expressing emotions can be verbally, but it could also be through physical activity, through journaling, through many different ways. Cognitive. Cognitive is challenging negative thoughts and attitudes and creating positivity and affirmation. So the brain is really amazing and it will try to conserve energy for us. So the things that we do over and over and over again will become automatic. And if you don't believe me, think about if this has ever happened to you. You're ever in the shower and you say to yourself, did I wash my hair already? Or if you're driving home and you drive home the same way every day, but today you're going to do something different and you pass that exit. You totally pass that exit and you wind up you're pulling in your driveway. And you say, "Oh shoot, I meant to do something else." That's the brain on automatic. And much like walking through a field of grass, if we walk over it the same way again and again and again, it lays trails. And that gives the brain the indication of, okay, I don't want to, I want to conserve energy. This is something that she always does. So we're just going to do it. We're not going to put a lot of energy reserve into that. But what happens when there's a lot of negativity, a lot of negative thinking, a lot of devaluing of yourself, you set those trails and they become automatic. We don't even know that we're thinking negatively about our surroundings or even ourself. There's a really good theory that's out there. It's called the cognitive behavioral theory. And it says, what I think over time, I start to feel. What I feel over time, I start to behave like. And what I behave like reinforces what I think. So it becomes a very poor cycle. So cognitively, what are those things that we can do to think positive on purpose? to kind of correct some of those automatic trails that we have. And then finally, coping. What is the active process? What is the problem focused activities that we do to cope every single day? And I can't tell you exactly what those are for you. You have to find out what works for you. I have a very good friend. She loves to be in the forest. I tease her. She likes to hug the trees. I don't go outside at all. I go as far as the mailbox to get my next package from Chico's, so that wouldn't work for me. But you have to find out what works for you. And if you are practicing these factors, you're going to build your resiliency for the next time something stressful comes along. We can go to the next slide. So I want to talk about what are some of the negative coping strategies, right? Sometimes these feel so good. They feel easy to do, and they give us some immediate satisfaction today, but they have some long-term negative consequences. So again, strategies that seem to temporarily relieve stress, but they cause some long-term issues. So some examples, and I'm sure there's hundreds more, but smoking or overeating or drugs and alcohol or excessive anger. And anger seems to be that emotion that's safe that protects us from other emotions that make us feel vulnerable. All right, we can go to the next slide. So I took the 5 factors that people have identified that will help them with adversity and recovery from stress, and I put them into different buckets of strategies. So the first strategy is calming strategy, engaging that parasympathetic nervous system. So relaxation, meditation, prayer. Prayer is a form of meditation. Maybe exercising, deep breathing, mindfulness. That's another term that I know a lot of people have heard about. And it's really just sort of being in the moment, right? Not thinking about the past, not thinking about the present, but about the future, but staying in the present. It might be making sure you're getting adequate sleep, that you're taking a break, even for 5 minutes, that you're decreasing your stimuli or listening to music or turning off electronics, right? I can't see you, but you can certainly raise your hand. How many people go to bed with their phone, right? How many people go to bed with their iPad, right? Having that constant stimuli that sort of doesn't let us shut down and engage that parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, go to the next slide. How do we have connect strategies? So talking with a friend, connecting with something greater than ourselves by enjoying nature, attending a religious service, becoming a volunteer, journaling to connect with ourselves and our feelings, calling a helpline, being in the library. I think this is a really great strategy for when you don't want to talk to anybody, but you don't want to be alone. There's always a lot of activity and some safe spaces in the library. What can you do for leisure? And certainly, what can you do for humor? That helps us connect to the human condition. Sometimes when I listen to humor, and it's like, okay, I'm not so alone, right? This is something that somebody's identified that's very common with human nature. We can go to the next slide. What are some safety strategies? Well, not compromising on your morals or values, creating a safe space for yourself, engaging in self care, creating boundaries, right? Part of that is saying no sometimes, asking for support, and knowing your limits. So those all create safety around us. And we can go to the next slide. And then what are some ways to deal with stress through self efficacy? Well, certainly goal setting, prioritizing what we need to really accomplish. Organization is another good self efficacy strategy. When I'm feeling overwhelmed and there's a million things to do, I always say, and I'm quoting this from the movie Meg, we're going to do what's in front of us. And then when we're done with that, we're going to go to the next thing. Right. So, not to overwhelm ourselves, but to organize and prioritize. Completing tasks, maybe starting off with ones that we know that are easier to complete, building up that feeling of self-efficacy, then going on to the harder ones. Engaging in problem solving, developing routines. And I put here something that's really good, I think, for many of the different areas of stress, puzzles, believe it or not. When you're focusing on the puzzle, you're not thinking about certain things. You're focusing on solving the problem. And when they're completed, gives you that feeling of self-efficacy. I have an aunt down in North Carolina, and I said to her, "Why don't you try it?" And she goes, "I don't know how you do that, 1,000-piece puzzle." And I think she's on her 6th or 7th or 8th puzzle now. She does it with my uncle, and they really enjoy it. And they find it very fulfilling, and they say it's very relaxing because they're not thinking about what's worrying them. They're really focused on sort of solving the problem with the puzzle. Okay. And I think dealing with stress, hope strategies, right? So, what brings us hope? Certainly positive affirmations. And I think you have to practice this, right? This is not one and done. I don't want to give you any sort of illusion that you're going to say a positive affirmation to yourself once and it's going to work. It takes practice like anything else. Changing your perspectives. A lot of times, sometimes I'd like to put a different frame around things, right? Changing my perspective. Well, if I look at it this way, it's not as bad. So, how do I put it into perspective? It's like almost when you go on vacation, you have somebody stand next to that boulder, right, to give it scale. How do I put a different frame around it to give it a different look to myself or a different scale? Practicing gratitude. It's very easy to focus on, again, that negativity of what we don't have. But what do we have? And how do we focus on that to build those positive trails and that resiliency? And then finding joy. Right, we can go to the next slide. So, in remembering attitude is everything, right? First place is crying, right? Something wasn't good about that, even though it was first place. But third place is really happy. So sometimes the way that we look at things, our attitudes and our beliefs, and the way that we think about things can decrease that level of stress. So I want to show you a couple of things that I have here in my office that I utilize. I have a little worry box that I use. It has a little pad in it, and it has a pen. And if there's something that comes along during the day and I can't necessarily deal with it at that particular moment, I will take this out and I will write something on that and I will put that and I will lock it away in the box. I said, okay, I'll get to it later. When I've showed this, when I've done live seminars, people say they need a much bigger box than this. And sometimes family and friends know they may be the little slips of paper in here. So, but this is something that you can do to say, I can't deal with that right now. It has to be dealt with, but I can't add that to my plate right now. I'm going to put it in here. I'm going to put it on the side. My mother used to tell me, set the timer, think about it, worry about it for 15 minutes. And when the timer goes off, that's it. We're not going to give it any more power. So again, that's another strategy to help you not get overwhelmed. Journaling, I picked these up, believe it or not, at the dollar store. I find it very helpful, particularly if I'm feeling that I'm overwhelmed and I'm very reactive. I might stop for a minute and I might jot down, and then later go back and say, okay, was that really as big as I felt it was in that particular moment? It may be a strategy to be able to express your feelings, in a way, in a safe space. But these are very easy, and any old paper or notebook would do. If you come into my office, I have a lot of positive affirmations. You can find these things. I have, keychains. I have different things, but these say, "Beautiful girl, you can do hard things." Right. So I have it right on my desk. So I'm feeling kind of hopeless or that I can't do it. I kind of glance down on that. This one says, "Be nice, work hard, and be brave." Right. So it's just that when I might be automatically going into that negative trail, I just remind myself with some positive affirmations. I also use some things. I use different aromatic oils. Certainly, bergamot is very good for anxiety. Lavender, for stress. Certainly, this is something I have a diffuser, and I put that in. I do that. I have these. You can find them, or you can find different meditations online. Few minutes. These are little devices that do a tone, different tone, for 3 minutes, and you can just close your eyes for 3 minutes and focus on the tone. And that will take me away from 3 minutes, just to engage that parasympathetic nervous system. But there's a lot of things online, and everybody has their phones, walking around with their phones, or you have iPads that you can just look up 3-minute meditations and quick meditations that you can do. So those are some of the things that I have in my office that I do every day. All right. And then I think we have one more slide. And I thought for today that we would do a little practice, right? We got this far. And we want to do a little bit of practice. So I want you to get comfortable wherever you're sitting, wherever you are. And if it feels okay for you, just to close your eyes just for a moment. Just really focus on where you're at. Put your feet on the floor. Rest your hands on the side of your chair. And I want you to take a really deep breath in through your nose and exhale through your mouth. And we're going to do that 2 more times. Just take a really deep breath in through your nose, really slowly, fully, and exhale slowly through your mouth. Let it go. Whatever you have on your plate right this moment, let it go. And we're going to do that one more time. Take a really deep breath in through your nose, slowly and fully, and then exhale through your mouth. Let it go. And I want you to continue to just focus on your breathing. And I'm going to read you a brief writing about hope. Choosing to hope is like lighting a candle on a dark road. The candle will not show you what lies too far ahead, but it casts enough light for you to find your way out of the present darkness. What is beautiful about this image is that when 2 or more come together, holding their candles of hope, they disperse more of the darkness and are able to see further ahead. And they become beacons for others to find their way. So just imagine that for a moment. With your candle of hope, take one final deep breath in, really slowly and fully, and exhale it out, bringing yourself back into the space. So I hope that was very helpful to you. I hope that you enjoyed that. I think we have some time that we can take some questions, Jonathan.
Yes, if anybody has any questions, there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You can enter them there.
Okay, I have one question that says, I find the older I get, I worry about everything, which causes me stress and sometimes anxiety. Yes, the older we get, the more we know, right? So if we are focusing on everything that could potentially happen, we are going to be bogged down with stress and feelings of anxiety. But I like to sometimes look at worry as my way of convincing myself that I have any control over anything. And I don't. I don't have any control over anything. So what does the worry serve you? How does that serve you? When you worry, can you replace it with another activity? So, for example, If I'm worrying about something I have no control over, how can I then switch to an activity that's going to engage in my parasympathetic nervous system? Maybe I'm going to journal. Maybe I'm going to put a timer on it and say, you know what? This is not realistic. I know that. And I'm going to, maybe reserve it as a possibility, but I'm going to only think about it for 10 minutes. And then I'm going to engage in something that is more positive. And you have to practice that every day. It has to be purposeful. It's not easy. I'm not saying that you're never going to fall back or you're never, this is going to be the cure all. But in that moment, how can you help yourself to say, this worrying is not serving me? Okay. I'm going to worry about it. I'm going to allow myself to worry about it a little bit. But what else can I do to replace that in that moment and engage that parasympathetic nervous system? Okay. So there's another question. It says, how can one deal with constant worrying about the safety of my college age son? Okay. So yeah, that's a really that's a really great question, right? Because when you're a parent, you always worry about your children, no matter how old they are. It's even beyond, I hate to tell you, when they get out of college, you're still going to worry about them. But I think there has to be, there's two processes that have to go on when we're dealing with children, is sort of giving them that independence to make choices and hoping that we've instilled in them the morals and values that they make um, good decisions for themselves. Uh, Um, but then how do you change that worrying to say, okay, you know what? I am worried about them, but I am trusting and I'm trusting in them and what I've taught them that they're going to be making right decisions for themselves and to let go of that. I've known many varieties of different parenting styles, I've been exposed to throughout the years, and I've had, believe it or not, dangerous, horrible things happen to people who were living with their parents, you know, versus away from their parents. So again, I'd like to say that nothing, nothing bad will ever happen in our lives, but that's not going to happen. How can we um, deal with sort of a little bit of the feeling and a little bit of the worry, but knowing that we're instilling that faith in our children that they're going to make right decisions for themselves. And I always, my son is going to be 27, and I always say to him in the phone conversation, allow me 5 minutes to be your mother, right? And say all the mom things that I want to say. And then after that, I'm saying, you're going to make the right decisions for yourself. All right. Um, Excellent presentation. How can I share this presentation with other family members? Um, it, an iteration of I did this before is definitely on YouTube. Jonathan, I don't know if it's going to be on YouTube again.
Yes, it will be on YouTube again. Just have to do some editing on my part, but yes, it will be on YouTube, under Mather Hospital.
So practice makes perfect. I want to tell you that I've had a very stressful 2 months, right? And I kind of joked with my colleagues today, and I said, "Don't laugh. I'm going to be doing a seminar on stress." So, because I was able to do the seminar on stress, does not mean that I'm always perfect at it, right? Because I'm human, and we're all human. And so I don't want you to get discouraged. There's a great commercial out there, and it says, Some days I'll be better at it than others. Some days I won't be able to do it, but I'm going to get back up and I'm going to do it again tomorrow." And I think that's all we can expect of ourselves from human beings as human beings. All right, I think we have a few more minutes. I don't know if anybody else has any questions or comments or anything.
Yeah, we can give it a few more seconds here. It's um that might have oh, here we go. Oh, not a question, but absolutely wonderful presentation.
Okay.
So I'm going to conclude it there. That seems to be
Okay.
of the questions, but I just wanted to thank you, Denise. Your presentations are amazing as always.
You're
And I
welcome.
want to thank everybody for joining. If you have any questions, you can email them off at matherhospital@northwell.edu. Once you exit the webinar, you'll see a link to complete a brief survey. Those surveys are extremely helpful for us. We always want to hear your feedback. And if you're interested in viewing past HealthyU webinars, you can see them at www.matherhospital.org/healthyu. Thank you so much again, Denise, and I hope
You're
everybody
welcome.
enjoys the rest of their day.
Bye-bye.